The crack in the eastern wall had appeared 3 days ago, small at first, barely noticeable between the ancient stones. By the second day, it had spread like a dark vein through the castle's foundation. Now, Rowan Blackthorn stood in the corridor, studying the damage with narrowed eyes. "The structure is sound, my king," the master builder said nervously. "The damage appears superficial." Rowan traced his fingers along the crack. It continued upward, disappearing into the ceiling and beyond. "Where does this lead?" The builder hesitated. "The north wing, Your Majesty. The forbidden wing. Sealed for generations by order, no one questioned anymore." Rowan had governed for 8 years, and in all that time, he had never thought to challenge the ancient command. But standing here, feeling the cold air seeping through the crack, something stirred in his chest, an instinct that had kept him alive through countless battles. "Gather my personal guard," Rowan said. "We're inspecting the north wing." The builder's face went pale. "But, Your Majesty, the seals are clearly failing if cracks are spreading through my castle." Rowan turned, his voice brooking no argument. "I need to know what's behind that door before the entire structure collapses." An hour later, Rowan stood before the sealed entrance to the north wing. The door was massive, carved from black oak that should have rotted centuries ago. Silver symbols covered every inch, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. His captain of the guard, Marcus, shifted uncomfortably beside him. "The records say this wing has been sealed for over 100 years, Marcus said quietly. "No explanation why." Rowan placed his palm against the door. The symbols flared brighter, and he felt a strange pull, like recognition. "Then it's time we found out." He drew his dagger and cut across his palm. Blood welled immediately, dark red and carrying the power of his position. When he pressed his bleeding hand to the largest symbol, the reaction was instantaneous. The silver marks exploded with brilliant white light. The door shuddered, and the sound of breaking glass filled the air as invisible barriers shattered. The seals cracked and fell away like dried leaves. Then, with a groan that echoed through the castle, the door swung open. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of stone and something else. Something old and powerful, that made his wolf stir restlessly beneath his skin. The corridor beyond was untouched by time. No dust, no decay. Torches burst into flame as they entered, lighting themselves with magic that should have faded decades ago. The passage stretched straight ahead, ending at a circular chamber. Rowan's boots echoed on the stone floor as he walked. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he were walking toward something inevitable, something that had been waiting. The chamber was perfectly round, with a domed ceiling covered in more of those silver symbols. They pulsed in rhythm, like a heartbeat. And in the center of the room stood a girl. She wore a dress that belonged to another era, dark green velvet that pooled around her feet. Her hair was the color of autumn fire, falling in long waves past her waist. But it was her eyes that stopped him, green as deep forest shadows, and completely aware. Chains of pure light wrapped around her wrists and ankles, anchoring her to the stone floor. They glowed with the same sick light as the door seals had. She didn't look surprised to see him. Instead, she smiled, and it was the saddest thing Rowan had ever seen. "You're finally here," she said, her voice clear despite the century she claimed. "I've been waiting 100 years for someone to open that door." Marcus drew his sword, but Rowan raised a hand, stopping him. "Who are you?" "My name is Elara Thornwood." She said it like it should mean something. When Rowan's expression didn't change, something flickered in her eyes. "You don't know that name, do you?" "They erased us completely." Rowan stepped closer, studying her. She looked no older than 24, her skin pale but healthy, as if she'd been standing here for hours instead of a century. "Thornwood. That was the royal family before your family took the throne when mine was slaughtered." There was no accusation in her tone, just statement of fact. "My father was Lysander Thornwood, the Alpha King. I am his daughter." The chains around her wrists suddenly flared brilliant white. She gasped, and Rowan moved without thinking. He crossed the remaining distance and reached for her. The moment his hands touched the light chains, they shattered. The sound was like 1,000 bells ringing at once, and the symbols on the ceiling went dark. Elara collapsed, and Rowan caught her before she hit the ground. She was solid. Real. Not a ghost or illusion. Her weight was real in his arms, and when she looked up at him, those green eyes were filled with tears. "You carry true power," she whispered. The chains recognized it. They were made to break only when touched by a legitimate alpha king. She laughed, the sound breaking. "I've been standing here for 100 years, and all I needed was someone worthy to open the door." Marcus and the other guards surrounded them, weapons drawn. "Your Majesty, we should take her to the dungeons. She could be dangerous." "No dungeon," Rowan said, helping Elara to her feet. Her legs shook, but she stood with dignity. "She comes with me. I want answers. And she's the only one who has them." He brought her to a guest chamber in the inhabited part of the castle, posting guards outside but not restraining her. She moved through the room like someone in a dream, touching the bed hangings, the window glass, as if confirming they were real. "Everything has changed," Elara said softly. "The tapestries are different. The furniture. Even the air feels different. 100 years will do that." Rowan poured wine from a decanter and offered her a cup. "Tell me what happened. How is any of this possible?" Elara took the wine but didn't drink. Instead, she stared into the dark liquid as if seeing memories there. "There was a man named Morgath, my father's most trusted advisor. I remember pieces, fragments. The magic that held me also suppressed my memories, I think. But I remember the night it happened." Her hands started to shake, and she set the cup down. "I was in my chambers when I heard shouting. My father's voice, angry and betrayed. I ran toward the throne room, but Morgath was waiting in the corridor. He said something, a binding phrase that made her teeth ache. Everything went dark." She pressed her hands to her temples, her face contorting. "When I woke, I was in that chamber. Chained. Morgath stood over me. He said my father was dead, that the entire Thornwood line would be erased, that I would stand there until the stones crumbled to dust. A warning to anyone who might challenge what he'd built. But he didn't kill you," Rowan said quietly. "Death would have been kinder." Elara's voice was hollow. "I've stood in that room for 100 years, Rowan Blackthorn, aware, conscious, unable to move or sleep or die. Just waiting, hoping someone would come." Before Rowan could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Marcus entered, his expression grim. "Your Majesty, the council demands an immediate assembly. Word has spread about what we found." The council chamber was filled with hostile faces when Rowan entered with Elara. She walked beside him with her head high, refusing to show fear even as 20 pairs of eyes tracked her every movement. Councillor Garrett, the eldest, stood immediately. "Your Majesty, this is madness. You've brought a creature of unknown origin into our castle based on nothing but her word." "She knew things," Rowan said calmly. "She described passages in the castle that aren't on any modern map. She knew about the old throne room, the one that was sealed after the transition of power. She knew details about this castle's construction that only the builders knew, and they've been dead for 70 years. Then she's a spy who learned old secrets," another councillor snapped. "Or a witch using glamour magic. Your Majesty, the law is clear. Unknown shifters who appear in our territory must be detained and verified. She claims to be royalty from an extinct line. That makes her a threat to your throne. Or it makes her proof that my family's rule began with murder." Rowan's voice cut through the chamber. "Think carefully about what you're suggesting. If she speaks the truth, then we need to understand what happened 100 years ago." Garrett's face darkened. The Thornwood dynasty fell to internal conflict and weakness. That is recorded history. Your great-grandfather took the throne when there were no heirs left, bringing stability to chaos. Are you questioning the legitimacy of your own rule? I'm questioning why an entire royal bloodline vanished in a single night, with no bodies ever found. Rowan looked at each council member in turn. I'm questioning why the North Wing was sealed with magic powerful to last a century. And I'm questioning why my blood was the key that broke those seals. The chamber fell silent. Finally, Elara spoke, her voice carrying despite its softness. I don't want your throne. I want the truth about what happened to my family, to my father, and I want whoever did this to answer for it. Execute her. Garrett said flatly. "Before she causes a rebellion or worse. The past should stay buried." "No." Rowan's command was absolute. "She will remain under guard in the castle while I investigate. I want every record from the transition of power brought to my study. I want the names of every advisor who served during that time. And I want to know why no one has questioned this before." That night, after the council had been dismissed and Elara returned to her guarded chamber, Rowan stood alone in his study. Old records covered his desk, dusty volumes pulled from the deepest archives. The official history was sparse. The Thornwood line ended. The Blackthorn line, loyal betas who had served faithfully, assumed control. Peace was restored. But now, reading between the lines, Rowan saw the gaps, saw how convenient it had been, saw how thoroughly one family had been erased. In her chamber, Elara sat by the window, staring at a moon she hadn't seen in 100 years, and behind her closed eyes, fragments of memory stirred. A face, a voice chanting terrible words, the smell of her father's blood. The truth was waking, and with it, something that had slept in darkness for far too long. The vision started on the third night. Elara woke gasping, her hands clutching at sheets that felt too soft, too real after a century of standing motionless. The dream had been vivid, not a dream at all, but a memory clawing its way through the magical suppression that had kept her mind locked. She saw her father's face. Lysander Thornwood, strong and commanding, but his eyes were wide with betrayal. 3 men stood behind Morgath in the throne room. Their faces were blurred, obscured by whatever spell had bound her memories, but she could see their silhouettes. 4 conspirators, not one. Elara pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold on to the image before it faded. There were others, she whispered to the empty room. Morgath didn't act alone. By morning, she demanded to see Rowan. The guards were reluctant, but when she described the vision, they brought her to his study immediately. Rowan looked like he hadn't slept. Books and scrolls covered every surface, some so old the pages crumbled at the edges. He glanced up when she entered, and something flickered in his blue eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or concern. "You look terrible," Elara said. A brief smile crossed his face. "I've been reading about your family all night. The official records are thin, suspiciously so." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Tell me about your vision." She sat, tucking her dress around her legs. The clothing they'd given her was modern, simpler than what she'd worn a century ago, but she still felt displaced, wrong in her own skin. "I saw my father die," she said quietly. Morgath was there, but he wasn't alone. 3 others stood with him. I can't see their faces, but I know they were important. Alphas, maybe. The kind of men who had power to lose. Rowan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "A conspiracy. That would explain how thoroughly your family was erased. One man, even a powerful advisor, couldn't have accomplished it alone." "What do the records say about the transition?" Elara asked. "That's the interesting part." Rowan pulled a particularly ancient volume toward him. "The Blackthorn family were betas, loyal to your father for generations. When the Thornwood line fell, there was a power vacuum. Multiple alphas tried to claim the throne. The records describe 3 years of near civil war before my great-grandfather finally consolidated power. 3 alphas, Elara said slowly. "The same number I saw in my vision. Perhaps they tried to seize power after eliminating your family, but turned on each other instead." Rowan's jaw tightened. "My ancestor took the throne because he was the only one left standing. The records paint him as a reluctant hero, stepping up when chaos threatened to destroy everything. But if 3 alphas conspired with Morgath, and they all fought for the throne afterward..." Elara's mind raced. What happened to them? According to this, 2 died in battle. The 3rd bent the knee to my great-grandfather and was allowed to keep his territory. Rowan looked up. "I need names. I need to know which families were involved." Over the following days, they worked together. Elara found that being near Rowan helped the memories surface more clearly. Something about his presence, his scent of pine and winter air, made the magical suppression weaken. She didn't understand it, But she didn't question it either. The archives yielded secrets slowly. Rowan had the old throne room unsealed, and Elara walked through it like a ghost, trailing her fingers over stones that remembered her. She showed him passages that weren't on any map, storage rooms that had been walled over, an escape tunnel that led from the royal chambers to the forest. "How do you know all this?" Rowan asked as they stood in the hidden tunnel, torches casting dancing shadows. "My father showed me." Elara's voice echoed softly. "He said a ruler needed to know every secret of their home, every way in, every way out. He said knowledge was armor." She laughed bitterly. "It didn't save him, but it might save us." Rowan studied her in the flickering light. "Your knowledge, combined with what we're learning, could help us understand what really happened." Their eyes met, and Elara felt something strange pulse through her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the torches. Rowan felt it too. She could see it in the way his breath caught, the way his pupils dilated slightly. He looked away first. "We should return. You've been out of your chambers too long. The council is already nervous." But the council had bigger concerns when Callum arrived 3 days later. He came with appropriate ceremony, an alpha from the Western Territories requesting formal audience. Rowan received him in the Great Hall, with Elara watching from behind a screen where visiting ladies traditionally observed court proceedings. Callum was older than Rowan, his hair more gray than brown, his beard neatly trimmed. He carried himself with confidence that bordered on arrogance. But what caught Elara's attention was the way his eyes swept the hall, lingering on the old family portraits that lined the walls. "Your Majesty," Callum said, bowing precisely the correct depth. "Thank you for receiving me. I've come to discuss trade agreements and territory boundaries." The discussions were tedious and political. Elara found her attention wandering until Callum made an offhand comment about the castle's history. "Such ancient halls," he said, looking around. "I've always been fascinated by the architecture of the Thornwood era. So much more elegant than modern construction." Something in his tone made Elara's spine stiffen. The way he said Thornwood, with too much knowledge, too much familiarity. That night, after Callum had been shown to guest chambers, Elara caught Rowan alone. "He knows something." "Callum?" Rowan frowned. "What makes you think that?" "The way he looked at the portraits, the way he spoke about my family." Elara paced, her instincts screaming. "He's studied this. He knows more than he should about a dynasty that was supposedly erased from history." Rowan's expression darkened. "I'll have him watched." The attack came 2 nights later. Elara woke to the sound of her chamber door opening. Not the creak of hinges, but the whisper of someone entering who didn't want to be heard. She rolled from the bed silently, her body remembering training from a century ago. The assassin moved through the darkness with professional grace. Elara saw the glint of a blade and threw herself sideways. The knife buried itself in her pillow where her throat had been seconds before. She screamed. The assassin cursed and lunged again, but the guards burst through the door. In the chaos and torchlight, Elara saw his face clearly. One of Rowan's own men. Someone who should have been protecting her. Rowan arrived as they were dragging the struggling guard away. He took in the scene instantly. The knife in the pillow, Elara pressed against the wall with wild eyes, the traitor fighting against his captors. "Dungeons," Rowan commanded. "Chain him. I want answers." The interrogation was brutal and efficient. Elara insisted on being present, standing beside Rowan as the traitor was brought before them in shackles. "Who sent you?" Rowan's voice was ice. The guard spat blood. "You're a fool, Blackthorn, building your throne on lies and stolen crowns. Answer the question. Alpha Callum knows the truth. He knows what his grandfather did, what your family built on top of murdered royalty." The guard's eyes found Elara. "She's the proof. The living evidence that everything you claim is false." Rowan's hand went to his sword. "Callum sent you. He sent me to eliminate the problem before she tears your kingdom apart." The guard laughed, the sound unhinged. "But it's too late. The truth is already spreading. The lost Thornwood princess, locked away for 100 years. How long before others start asking questions? How long before they wonder what else you've been hiding?" Marcus stepped forward. "He's been in Callum's pay for months. We found messages in his quarters, detailed reports about castle security, Your Majesty's movements, and—" He hesitated, glancing at Elara. "Detailed observations about her." Rowan's jaw clenched. "Take him back to the dungeons. I want every guard vetted. Anyone with connections to Callum's territory is to be placed under watch." After the traitor was removed, Rowan turned to Elara. "He's using you. Callum wants to destabilize my rule by proving the Blackthorn claim to the throne is questionable." "It is questionable," Elara said quietly. "Your family took power when mine was murdered. That's not exactly a clean succession." "No." Rowan stepped closer, and that strange warmth flared again between them. "But it's the succession we have. And I won't let someone like Callum use a century-old tragedy to plunge the realm into chaos." Elara met his eyes. "Then, we need to find out the whole truth. All of it, including what Callum knows and how he knows it." "Agreed." Rowan's hand brushed hers, and the contact sent electricity up her arm. They both stepped back quickly, confused by the intensity. Neither understood it yet. Neither wanted to acknowledge what their wolves already knew. But the connection between them was growing stronger with each passing day, building toward something neither could control. The ritual chamber was deep beneath the castle, in a place even Elara's fragmented memories had forgotten. She found it by instinct, following corridors that pulled at something ancient in her blood. Rowan walked beside her, torch in hand, trusting her completely despite the madness of it all. "My father brought me here once," Elara said, as they descended worn stone steps. "When I was young, he said the old magic still lived in the bones of the castle, and sometimes we needed to ask it for truth." The chamber was circular, carved with symbols that predated even the Thornwood dynasty. A stone altar stood in the center, stained dark with centuries of ritual use. Elara approached it slowly, her hands trembling. "This is dangerous," Rowan said quietly. "Magic this old, this powerful, it demands a price." "I know." Elara placed her palms flat on the altar. "But I need to remember everything. Not fragments, not pieces. If we're going to face Callum and whoever else conspired to destroy my family, I need the whole truth." Elara cut her palm with a knife Rowan handed her. Blood welled immediately, bright red and carrying the power of her lineage. When it touched the altar, the symbols flared to life. Pain exploded through her skull. Elara screamed, and Rowan caught her as her legs gave out. But she couldn't stop now. The magic had taken hold, ripping through the suppression spell that had kept her memories locked for a century. She saw everything. The throne room, her father standing proud and strong, Morgath approaching with 3 others. She knew their faces now, recognized them from portraits and histories. Alpha Brennan of the Eastern Territories, Alpha Thaddeus of the South, and Alpha Victor of the West. "You've betrayed everything we built," her father said, his voice heavy with grief and rage. Morgath smiled. "We're taking what should have been ours from the beginning. Your family has ruled long enough, Lysander." The attack was swift and brutal. 4 against 1, and her father never had a chance. Elara watched through her younger self's eyes as he fell, blood spreading across the marble floor. She watched Morgath turn toward her hiding place behind a pillar. "The girls saw," Brennan said urgently. "We can't leave witnesses." "I won't kill a child," Victor said, but his voice was weak. "Then I'll do it," Thaddeus replied. But Morgath raised a hand. "No, I have a better idea. A spell that will keep her alive but contained. A warning to anyone who might discover what we've done." The memory shifted. Pain and darkness in Morgath's face above her, chanting words that burned. The last thing she saw before the spell took hold was her father's body, still and cold on the throne room floor. Elara came back to herself gasping, tears streaming down her face. Rowan held her steady, his hands gripping her arms. "I saw them," she choked out. "All 4. Morgath, Brennan, Thaddeus, and Victor. They killed my father together." Rowan's face went pale. "Those names. I know those names. They were the Alphas who fought for the throne after," Elara said. "Brennan and Thaddeus died in the Civil War. But Victor bent the knee to my great-grandfather and kept his territory." Rowan finished, voice tight. "The Western Territories. the same lands Callum governs now. Callum is Victor's descendant, Elara said. He knows, because his grandfather was part of it. He knows the truth about what happened 100 years ago. They climbed back to the surface in silence, both processing the weight of what they'd learned. The traitor who had tried to kill Elara was executed at first light, his confession sealed with the rest of the evidence Rowan was assembling. But there was no time to plan. Messengers arrived before midday, carrying formal summons sealed with multiple alpha marks. Callum had called an assembly. "He's forcing your hand," Marcus said grimly as they gathered in Rowan's study. "An assembly requires your attendance. If you refuse, it questions your authority." Rowan read the summons, his expression dark. "He's demanding that Elara be brought before the assembly to prove her identity, or be executed for imposture and disruption of the peace. And if I prove who I am?" Elara asked. "Then he'll argue that I have no legitimate claim to the throne," Rowan said. "He's trying to start a civil war." "Then we give him what he wants," Elara replied, "but on our terms." The assembly gathered in neutral territory, an ancient meeting ground where alphas had convened for centuries. Rowan arrived with his guard, and Elara walked beside him, head high despite the hostile stares. Callum stood at the center with 2 other alphas. Elara recognized their features from the portraits she'd studied. Descendants of Brennan and Thaddeus, bloodlines of kingslayers still holding land. "Alpha King Rowan," Callum said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "You bring before us a woman who claims to be of the extinct Thornwood line." "I bring before you Elara Thornwood," Rowan replied calmly. "Daughter of Lysander Thornwood, the true Alpha King." Callum smiled. "Then let her prove it. Let her show evidence beyond stories and convenient memories. Because if she cannot, she dies here for the chaos she's caused." Elara stepped forward. Her hand went to the chain around her neck, hidden beneath her dress until now. She pulled it free, revealing a ring that caught the light. The seal of the Alpha King. Callum's expression flickered. "A ring proves nothing. It could have been stolen, found, taken from a corpse. It's more than a ring," Elara said. She held it up, and the magic within flared to life. Symbols appeared in the air around it, glowing gold and ancient. "My father enchanted it with truth magic. It recorded what happened in its presence that night." She spoke the activation word her father had taught her, and the ring released its memory. The vision appeared above them, massive and undeniable. Lysander Thornwood in the throne room. 4 men approaching. The attack, the murder, and their faces, clear and recognizable even after a century. "Morgath," Elara said as the vision played. "Brennan, Thaddeus, and Victor." The 2 alphas descended from Brennan, and Thaddeus went white. They stared at the vision, at their ancestors committing regicide, and then at Callum. "You knew," one of them said, his voice shaking. "Our families are implicated," the other snapped. "You've dragged us all into this." Callum's composure cracked. "They were weak, all of them. My grandfather told me the truth before he died. The Thornwoods were leading us to ruin, and someone had to act. Yes, it was conspiracy. Yes, it was murder." "You admit to hiding the assassination of a legitimate Alpha King," Rowan said coldly. "I admit that your family built its throne on the corpses of the rightful rulers." Callum shot back. His hand moved to his sword. The 2 implicated alphas moved quickly, flanking Callum. "Our ancestors committed this crime," one said urgently. "Not us. We had no knowledge of it until now. We denounce their actions," the other added. "We stand with Alpha King Rowan. You're under arrest," Rowan said. Callum shifted. His wolf form was massive and gray, and he moved with desperate speed. He crashed through the circle of alphas and disappeared into the forest before anyone could react. The assembly dissolved into controlled chaos. Rowan issued orders for pursuit, but Callum had planned his escape well, leaving nothing to track. The 2 pardoned alphas approached Rowan as the gathering dispersed. "Your Majesty," one said quietly, "we will submit to any judgment you decree." "Our families are stained by this." Rowan studied them both. "Your ancestors made their choices. You've made yours today by standing against Callum. Trust must be earned." He paused. "You will remain in your territories under watch. and you will each provide a contingent of your best warriors to serve in my personal guard." They agreed quickly. When the assembly grounds were finally empty except for Rowan's inner circle, Elara stood before them. "I am Elara Thornwood," she said clearly, "daughter of Lysander, last of my line, and I formally abdicate any claim to the throne of this realm. The world my father ruled is gone," Elara continued. 100 years have passed. My family is dead. My time is over. Rowan Blackthorn has ruled justly and well. That makes his claim legitimate by right of conquest and by right of competence." She looked directly at Rowan. "I want justice for my father. I want the truth known, but I don't want a crown that belongs to the past." Rowan stepped forward, and when he took her hand, that warmth flared between them again, stronger now. It was a mate bond, beginning to form, tightening with each moment they spent together. But this wasn't the time. Not with enemies to hunt and a realm to stabilize. Rowan squeezed her hand once and released it. "The Assembly recognizes Elara Thornwood's abdication," he said formally, "and recognizes her as a member of this court under my protection." It was done. The truth was known, Elara's identity proven, and Callum exposed. But as they rode back toward the castle, Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. The reports started arriving within days of the assembly. Callum had vanished into the borderlands, the lawless territories where rogues and outcasts gathered, but he hadn't gone into hiding. He was recruiting. "He's promising a return to the old ways," Marcus reported, spreading maps across the war table, "telling displaced wolves that you've built your throne on lies and murder, that the rightful bloodline was destroyed to serve Blackthorn ambitions." Rowan studied the maps, noting the marked locations where Callum's influence was spreading. "He's twisting the truth, making it sound like my family orchestrated the conspiracy instead of taking power after it fell apart." "It doesn't matter what's true," Elara said quietly from her position by the window. "It matters what people believe. And a story about stolen thrones and murdered royalty is compelling." She turned to face them, and Rowan felt that pull again. The mate bond had been growing stronger over the past weeks, an invisible thread connecting them that tightened every time they were in the same room. "How many has he gathered?" Rowan asked. "Last count, 200 fighters," Marcus replied. "Rogues mostly, but some from established packs who feel they've been overlooked or slighted. He's also making promises to younger sons, wolves who will never inherit their father's positions. He's offering them land, titles, purpose. 200 isn't an army," Rowan said. "Not yet. But the numbers grow daily." Marcus met his eyes. "Your Majesty, we need to act before this becomes a real threat." Elara moved to the table, her eyes scanning the maps with an intensity that made Rowan's chest tighten. "These positions, the way he's moving. I've seen this pattern before." "What do you mean?" "My father dealt with an uprising once when I was young. The rebels used the same strategy, gathering in the borderlands, making small raids to draw out defenders, then melting back into territory where tracking was difficult." She traced a finger along the map. "But they weren't just recruiting. They were mapping our responses, learning our patterns." Rowan leaned forward. "You think Callum is doing the same?" "I know he is." Elara pointed to 3 marked locations. "These raids here, and here. They're testing your response times, seeing how quickly you can mobilize forces to different regions. He's gathering intelligence. Then we need someone who knows the old strategies," Marcus said. "Someone who understands how these campaigns were fought before modern tactics." Elara met Rowan's gaze. "I can help. My father taught me warfare as well as politics. The terrain hasn't changed in 100 years. The hidden routes through the mountains, the places where small forces can hide or strike. I remember all of it." They worked together through the following weeks, and Rowan discovered that Elara's knowledge was invaluable. She showed them supply routes that hadn't been used in generations, passes through mountain ranges that no longer appeared on maps, defensive positions that could hold against forces 3 times their size. But more than that, working beside her felt natural. When they bent over maps together, he was hyper-aware of her proximity. The brush of her hand against his sent electricity through his entire body. He caught her watching him sometimes, her expression unguarded for just a moment before she looked away. She felt it too. One night, after the others had left and they remained alone in the war room, Elara spoke quietly. "Do you feel it? This connection?" Rowan's hand stilled on the map he'd been studying. "Yes. What is it?" He could lie. Pretend ignorance. But she deserved truth. A mate bond, beginning to form. Elara's breath caught. "I thought that's what it might be. I've never felt one before. But the stories..." She trailed off. "This complicates everything." "I know," Rowan said. "We don't have to act on it while Callum is still a threat. Would you want to? After?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Before Rowan could answer, horns sounded outside. An attack on the eastern border. The moment shattered, and they moved into action. Days turned to weeks. Callum's forces grew bolder, striking faster, and retreating before defenders could engage. Each raid left behind a trail of broken doors and blood in the snow, and each report that reached the castle carried the same message. Callum was testing them, measuring the realm's pulse, and learning where it hurt. Rowan responded with patrols and riders and quiet reinforcements, refusing to give Callum the open battle he wanted. It was becoming clear that conventional tactics wouldn't work. They needed to draw him out, force a real confrontation. "I could be bait," Elara said one morning. "Absolutely not," Rowan said immediately. "Think about it. I'm what he wants. The living symbol of Thornwood legitimacy that undermines your rule. If word spread that I was traveling through neutral territory with light guard, he'd take the opportunity. To kill you." Rowan growled. "The answer is no. It's the fastest way to end this," Elara insisted. "Every day he recruits more followers. Every day this drags on, more doubt spreads about your legitimacy. We end this by ending him." Marcus looked from Elara to Rowan, grim agreement on his face even as he hated the idea. "Her reasoning is sound, Your Majesty. It doesn't mean it's safe." They argued for hours, but Rowan was immovable. So Elara did it anyway. She left 3 nights later while Rowan was dealing with a border dispute, taking only 2 guards and heading toward a trading post in neutral territory. She made sure word of her journey spread. Careless talk in taverns, visible travel on main roads. By the time Rowan discovered she was gone, it was too late to stop her. She did what? His roar echoed through the castle. Marcus winced. "She took the north road to the trading post at Millhaven. She's been gone for 6 hours, Your Majesty." Rowan shifted before he'd fully made the decision, his wolf taking over in rage and fear. The mate bond, still incomplete, pulled tight in his chest. He could feel her through it, alive, aware, but something was wrong. He ran faster than he'd ever run before. The message found him halfway to Millhaven. One of Elara's guards, barely alive, had dragged himself to a way station. Callum had ambushed them. Taken Elara, left a message. "Come alone to the old ruins at Ravencross, or she dies at dawn." Marcus and the elite guard caught up to Rowan within the hour. "It's a trap," Marcus said, breathing hard. "He knows you'll come. He's counting on it." "I know," Rowan said, "but I don't have a choice." They gathered 20 of his best warriors. As they prepared to move out, 2 unexpected groups arrived. The Alphas Rowan had pardoned after the assembly, each bringing 50 fighters. "We heard about the abduction," one said gruffly. "Our forces are yours. We'll prove our loyalty in blood if we must." Rowan didn't have time to question their motives. He nodded sharply, and they moved out as one force. Ravencross was ancient, even by the standards of this realm. Ruins of a civilization that had existed before shifters, before the old magic. Broken pillars reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers, and the whole place reeked of something dark and old. The stones carried markings that mirrored the ones that had held Elara for a century. Rowan approached with his force spread in a wide perimeter, staying hidden among the ruins. In the center courtyard, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows, Callum stood beside a stone altar. Elara knelt before it, her hands bound, but her head was high. "Rowan Blackthorn," Callum called out. "I know you're here. I can smell your fear. Come out, or I open her throat right now." Rowan stepped into the torchlight, hands away from his weapons. "I'm here. Let her go." Callum laughed. "You think this is a negotiation? You both die here tonight. But first, let me show you what I found." He pulled out a leather-bound book, pages yellow with age, my grandfather's journal, full of his research into the magic he used to imprison her. Blood magic, old and terrible. It requires a sacrifice to activate, and tremendous power to maintain. His smile was cruel. "But I have both." On the altar, symbols began to glow. The same sick light that had surrounded Elara's chains 100 years ago. "I'm going to put you both in eternal stasis," Callum said. "Aware but unable to move, unable to die. You'll stand here in these ruins as monuments to what happens when power is stolen. And I'll rule unchallenged." Rowan's hand moved toward his sword, but Callum was faster. He grabbed Elara, a knife appearing at her throat. "Don't," Callum warned, "or she dies before the spell can take her." The symbols on the altar burned brighter, and Rowan realized with cold certainty that Callum was serious. He'd spent months planning this, gathering the materials, learning the magic. It was calculated destruction of everything that threatened his path to power. The moment Callum's attention focused on activating the spell, Rowan gave the signal. His warriors erupted from the ruins in a coordinated strike. The two pardoned alphas led their contingents from opposite sides, catching Callum's rogues in a pincer movement. Steel clashed against steel, and the night filled with snarls and screams. Callum's knife wavered at Elara's throat as chaos exploded around him. She took the opening, driving her elbow back into his ribs. He grunted and his grip loosened just enough. She twisted free and rolled away as Rowan's sword came down where she'd been kneeling. The blade met Callum's hastily raised dagger, and the two alphas faced each other over crossed steel. "You can't win this," Callum snarled. "The spell is already active. It just needs blood to finish." The symbols on the altar pulsed faster, hungry for the sacrifice that would make the prison hold. Elara scrambled to her feet, her eyes fixed on the glowing marks. She knew these patterns, had lived trapped within them for 100 years. In that time, standing frozen but aware, she'd had nothing to do but study what bound her. "Rowan," she called out, "I know how to break it." Rowan drove Callum back with a powerful strike, creating space between them. "How?" "It needs Alpha King blood to anchor the final binding," Elara said, forcing the words out through the fear tightening her throat. "Blood willingly given. With the wrong blood, it can still throw a freezing net across the ground, but it won't hold the way he wants. That's why he dragged me here. That's why he needs you." Around them, the battle raged. Marcus and the elite guard cut through Callum's forces with brutal focus. The rogues had numbers but lacked discipline, and they broke quickly under coordinated assault. Callum saw his advantage slipping away. With a roar, he abandoned his fight with Rowan and lunged for the altar. His hand came down on the central symbol, and his blood splashed across the glowing marks. The spell surged. Light exploded outward in a wave of sickening energy. It swept across the ruins, and everyone it touched froze in place. Rowan's warriors became statues mid-strike. The rogues stopped mid-retreat. Even the wind seemed to still. Rowan felt the magic wrap around him, cold and invasive, trying to lock his muscles in place. But the mate bond flared in his chest, hot and fierce, and it gave him just enough resistance to keep moving, slowly, fighting every inch, but moving. Elara felt it too. The spell recognized her, tried to claim her again the way it had 100 years ago, but she'd been preparing for this since the moment she'd left the castle. She'd studied her father's journals, memorized the counterstructure, armed herself with knowledge, and she had something she hadn't had before. The mate bond, incomplete but powerful, connecting her to an Alpha King whose blood sang with legitimate power. Callum laughed, the sound echoing across the frozen battlefield. "You see, it's over. Soon you'll both be as still as stone, aware and trapped forever." Elara met Rowan's eyes across the distance. She saw him fighting the spell, saw the strain in every line of his body. Through the bond, she felt his determination and his refusal to give up. "Trust me," she said. Then she threw herself directly into the spell's center. The magic hit her like a physical blow, wrapping around her with familiar, terrible intimacy. But Elara didn't fight it. Instead, she opened herself to it, let it flow through her, and in that moment of connection, she understood its full shape. She pulled the knife from her belt and cut deep across her palm. Thornwood blood, royal and ancient, welled up bright red. "You think royal blood will save you?" Callum sneered. "It only makes you a better anchor." "You're right," Elara said, her voice steady despite the agony. "Royal blood anchors it. But you forgot something important." As she pressed her bleeding hand to the altar, directly over where Callum had spilled his blood. "The Thornwoods created this spell, which means Thornwood blood can command it." She spoke the binding phrases her father had taught her in secret, each one a lever inside the spell work. Words that turned locks, loosened knots, and reversed the direction of power. The spell shuddered. The light flickered. Callum's expression changed from triumph to confusion to dawning horror. No, that's not— "You wanted to imprison us," Elara said, her voice growing stronger as the magic answered to her blood. "But blood magic is about intent and power. My intent is stronger, and my power has been tempered by 100 years of standing inside your grandfather's work." She twisted the magic with a final command, and the spell reversed. The light that had been spreading outward collapsed inward, rushing back toward its source. Callum tried to run, but the magic was faster. It wrapped around him in chains of light identical to the ones that had held Elara. His body locked in place, and his scream cut off abruptly as the spell took hold. In seconds, it was done. Callum stood frozen, his face locked in an expression of rage and fear, encased in the same eternal prison he'd tried to create for others. The spell binding the battlefield shattered. Rowan's warriors stumbled as movement returned, weapons dropping as they caught their balance. The remaining rogues threw down their weapons and fled into the darkness. But Elara collapsed. The backlash hit her all at once. She'd channeled forces that would have killed a lesser shifter instantly. And even with her royal bloodline, it was too much. Her vision grayed, and she felt her heartbeat slowing. She was dying. Rowan was beside her in an instant, catching her before she hit the ground. Through the mate bond, he felt her life force dimming, slipping away like water through his fingers. "No," he growled. "No, you don't get to die. Not after everything. I'm sorry," Elara whispered, her voice barely audible. At least my father is avenged. Elara, stay with me." Rowan's hands cupped her face, and through the bond, he pushed everything he had toward her. Strength. Life. Will. Don't you dare leave. Her eyes were starting to close. The mate bond, still incomplete, wasn't strong enough to anchor her, unless he completed it. Rowan didn't hesitate. He pulled her closer and sank his teeth into the junction of her neck and shoulder, the traditional marking place. The bite was deep, claiming, and absolute. His wolf surged forward, pouring power through the bond, demanding that she live. The change was immediate. The mate bond snapped into place fully, no longer forming but complete. It blazed between them like a lifeline, and Rowan felt Elara's fading heartbeat strengthen. The bond anchored her to life through him, through their connection. Her eyes flew open, wide and startled. She gasped, drawing in a deep breath, and her hand clutched at his arm. "Rowan," she breathed. Then consciousness left her. But this time it was exhaustion, not death. Her heartbeat remained steady, sustained by the bond between them. She slept for 3 days. Rowan never left her side. He sat beside her bed in the royal chambers, holding her hand, feeling her presence through the bond that now connected them absolutely. Marcus tried to pull him away for council meetings, for reports, for the 100 things that required a king's attention. Rowan ignored all of it. On the 3rd day, as dawn light streamed through the windows, Elara's eyes opened. Rowan was there immediately, leaning forward. "You're awake. You marked me." Her hand went to her neck, feeling the bite that had already healed into a permanent mark. "You completed the bond. I had to. You were dying." His voice was rough with emotion. "I couldn't let that happen." Elara was quiet for a moment, processing. Then her other hand touched his neck, and Rowan realized with a start that he bore a matching mark. "You marked me back," he said, surprised. "While you were unconscious?" "My wolf did." Elara's smile was small but genuine. She wasn't about to let the bond be one-sided. "We're mates now. True mates. Recognized by every law. Are you angry?" "No." She sat up slowly, and Rowan helped her, his hands steady and sure. I think part of me knew this was always where we'd end up. From the moment you opened that door and broke my chains. They sat together in comfortable silence, feeling the bond settle into place between them. Through it, Rowan could sense her contentment and her peace, underneath the lingering exhaustion. "Callum?" she asked finally, frozen in eternal stasis, exactly as he planned for us. The council voted to leave him in the ruins as a warning. Rowan's hand tightened on hers. "Your father has been avenged. The truth about the conspiracy is known, and the realm is stable. Then it's really over." Elara's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief. 100 years of standing still, and now I'm finally free. "Free," Rowan agreed. "And if you'll have it, you'll be Luna Queen. My mate and my partner." Elara looked at him, really looked at him, and through the bond he felt her decision before she spoke it. "I don't want to rule," she said honestly. "That was my father's world, not mine. But I want to help, to use what I know to make this realm stronger, to stand beside you, not above anyone. That's all I'd ever ask." She leaned forward and kissed him, and it was gentle and sure, and felt like coming home after a century of being lost. In the weeks that followed, Elara settled into her new role. She worked with the council, sharing knowledge from her father's era that strengthened trade routes and defensive positions. She walked through the castle freely, no longer a prisoner of time or magic, just a woman building a new life. And at night, she slept in Rowan's arms, the mate bond warm and complete between them, proof that some chains were meant to be welcomed rather than broken.